Good afternoon all of you. Hope you all are well in your home. You remember what we learned in the last class? Yes, a letter from Jawaharlal Nehru to his daughter Indira, that is the book of nature. Very interesting. So here we are going to deal with the next part of our textbook, the second part of our textbook, and the fourth unit titled as Work is Worship. Work is Worship. Work is worship, that is the fourth unit. What do you understand from this? Yes, we do any activity or work that has some dignity. Work is worship. So, in this unit we have a beautiful story titled as The Grain as Big as a Hen's Egg. Very interesting story. Before that, something is there to discuss. So, come to page number 105 all, 105. Yes, what you see there in this page? Yes, some pictures are there, some dialogues are there. So, let us discuss what it. Here are some pictures with dialogues. Read them carefully, answer the questions that follow. So, you have to read all these dialogues and you have to answer it. The first one, hello friends, come and enjoy the summer delights. No, we must collect food for the rainy season. Why bother about rainy days? We have plenty of food now. We have no time to play, we have to finish our duties. So, they have to always, someone concentrate on, they have to do some activity, they have to earn the food items. So, they just deals with that. So, the following questions, why do the ants work hard? So, here we can see that the ants actually work too hard. For what or why the ants work for hard? Yes, to earn some food in the rainy season. So, you have right answer there. What do you think will happen during the rainy days? And they said that what will happen in the rainy days or rainy season? Answer the question. If you happen to see the grasshopper, you know the grasshopper? Yes. What advice will you give? So, here grasshopper, the conversation is between the grasshopper and ants. So, if you happen to see, if you get a chance to see the grasshopper, what is the advice you give to it? Now, look at the picture given here. Under that you can see another picture. What are these people doing? You can see some picture, a man, a woman, a girl and a boy. So, they are engaged in some activities. So, what are these people doing? Who does the work at home? Are all the members of the family responsible for the work here? So, here we can see that they are in a family and all the 4 people are engaged in some of different activities. So, just read the question and answer it in your notebook. Now, we are going to learn a new story in text part 2. The Grain as Big as a Hen's Egg. What is the title? The Grain as Big as a Hen's Egg. The Grain as Big as a Hen's Egg, that is the title. So, what you understand from the title? The grain, you know the grain is a seed, grain, and it is big, it is very big as a hen's egg. You know egg? Yes, that is a hen's egg. So, the grain, one egg grain, it is in the size of a egg. So, usually you know the size of a grain. So, here we go to the story. Before that you can see a passage in the borderlines. Farming is not merely an act of cultivating crops. Farming is not only a process of cultivating all the crops. It glorifies labor. It keeps glorify or it keep a dignity there. It glorifies labor, helps to develop a concern for fellow beings, and brings about a perfection to human life. Read the story and realize the importance of farming and its impact on our life and culture. Here, through this story, we can understand what is the dignity or what is the impact on our life, what is the impact of farming in our life and culture. So, the story is divided into many categories. So, the first category is the discussion. So, from the title we can understand that someone in a discussion about something. So, come to the story now. You can see pictures. So, let us observe the picture carefully, then come to the story all. One day, some children found in a ravine an object shaped like a grain of corn with a groove down to the middle but as large as a hen's egg. One day, some children, they found what? A seed, a grain. It is like a hen's egg. A traveler passing by saw it, and from the children's hand, a traveler is passing through it, then he saw that. He bought it from the children for a penny, and he gave a penny. Penny is a coin, money. So, he gave a penny, a coin to the children, and he bought it from the children. He took it to the town and sold it to the king as it was a curious one. And what he do? This man just bought it from the children for a penny, and he again sold the grain as hen's egg to the king as a curious one. The king called all his wise men and told them to find out what the thing was, and actually it is in the size of a hen's egg. So, king don't know what the seed is, what is it a grain or not, anything. So, he called all the wise men in the palace to identify it. The wise men thought and thought, but couldn't make head or tail of it. What they do? The wise men, the clever people in the court or palace, they thought and thought, they thought about that, and they cannot understand, they cannot find out the head portion or the tail part of the seed. A few days later, when the thing was lying on a windowsill, a hen flew in and pecked at it till she made a hole in it. A few days later, after some days, when the thing was lying on a windowsill, the grain is lying on the window side. That time, a hen flew in and pecked it till she made a hole in it. And what the hen do? It just peck it and create or made a hole in it, in the grain. Then everyone saw that it was a grain of corn. That time, only that time, all the people in the palace or court understood that it was really a grain. The wise man went to the king and said, it is a grain of corn. That time the wise man in the court or palace said that actually it is a grain of corn. At this, the king was much surprised. That time the king was very surprised. He ordered learned men to find out when and where such a corn grew. That time he ordered to the wise people in the court or palace that you should find out where this grain, this type of grain is cultivated or grew. The learned men pondered again, and searched in their books, but could find nothing about it. And the wise people, the clever people, just search for it everywhere in the book, but they cannot identify it, they cannot find nothing about the grain corn. So they returned to the king and said, then they finished they completed their search from the books, and they returned from the place to the king's side and said, we can give you no answer. There is nothing about in our books. And they answered to king that word, we cannot find out any information because there is nothing about the grain in our books. You will have to ask the peasants, perhaps some of them may have heard from their fathers when and where a grain grew to such a size. And the king ordered to them to identify which the corn is, and they said that we didn't get any answer because nothing, no information is there in our books. Then they said that you will have to ask the peasants, king, you have to ask the peasants, maybe they know, perhaps some of them have heard about the grain and they can answer you. Then so the king have orders that some very old peasants should be brought before him. His servants found one such man and brought him to the king. That time the king ordered to the wise men, that his servants, that please contact or please tell or ask the peasants about the grain as hen's egg. His servants found one such man and brought him to the king, and the servants searched for all the peasants, all the peasants in the village, and they got one of them and they brought him to the king. He was old and bent. So here the character sketch of the peasant. He was very old and bent. Bent, you know, in an old age the people became bent. So he was old and bent, pale and toothless. He have no tooth because aged old man. He could just manage to totter into the king's palace with the help of crutches. So the old man, he was very old and bent and have no tooth, no teeth in his mouth. He could just manage to totter into the king's palace with the help of crutches, and he came to the king's side with the help of a crutches. Crutches, you know, stick, walking stick. The king showed him the grain, but the old man could hardly see it, and the king just showed the old man the grain as hen's egg. But the old man could hardly see it, but hardly means nothing, not, that mean negative meaning. But the old man could hardly see it, but this old man cannot see the grain. He took it, however, and felt it with his hands. The king questioned him, saying, and he took it, however, and felt it with his hands. He just touched it with his hands. The king questioned him, saying, can you tell us, old man, where such grains grew? Have you ever brought such corn or sown it in your field? And when the old man touched the grain, the king asked him a question that, can you tell us, old man, where such grains grew? Where such type of grains grew? Is it maybe in your field? Can you tell something about that? Have you ever bought it from anyone or sold it to any people? Then the old man was so deaf that he could hardly hear what the king said and only understood with great difficulty. But here the poor old man, he could not hear what the king is actually telling. Why? Because he didn't have any capacity to hear, because he is too old. Now he answered at last, I never sowed nor reaped any like this in my fields, nor did I ever buy any such. And at last, in a difficult manner, in a difficulty, the old man answered that, no, not in my field. We didn't buy it from anyone, we didn't sell to anyone, not in my end, not cultivated in our field. When he bought corn, the grains were always as small as they are now. And he answered, when we cultivate it in our field, or we just bought from people, it is small in size, not big as this, it is very small in size. But you might ask my father, you might ask it to my father. He might know where such grains grew. Maybe my father can answer you where this type of grains grew. Here the first session of our story ends. The discussion ends here. Here you have to write 3 questions. The first question is, pick out the sentences that gives you the idea that the wise man could not understand anything about the corn. So which sentence tell you that the wise men in the palace, they are unaware of the corn, they are not enough information about the corn. So, read the text and just pick out the lines and write it there in your notebook. The second question, the learned men failed to find an answer about the corn. What do you think the king would do next? So, the learned men, they cannot give an answer to the king about the corn. So, what do you think? What the king do next? That is the second question. So, you have to write the answer. Now, the third question, why did the peasant suggest that his father might give a better solution? The peasant said that he is unaware of the corn, he didn't bought it from anyone and sold to anyone, but my father maybe know that. So, why this peasant said that what my father might give a better solution? Why he said that? That is the third question. So, you have to write the answer. Now, the next session of the story, that is the great grandfather. The great grandfather. The next session of our story is the great grandfather. So, here it is, page number 109. The king sent for the old man's father and he was brought before him. So, now the king sent for the old man, the peasant's father, and he was brought before him, and the old man now is in front of the king. He came walking on one crutch. Look at that, he came, the peasant's father came on one crutch. The king showed him the grain, and the old peasant, who was still able to see, took a good look at it. And the king showed him the grain, and the old peasant, who was able to see, the later peasant, he cannot see, he cannot hear, but this his father, he can see it, and he just give a good look at it. And the king asked him, can you tell us, old man, where a corn like this is used to grow? Have you ever brought anything like it or sown it in your fields? So, the king repeated the same question. You know something about this grain, and maybe you bought it from someone or sold it to someone, etc. Though the old man was rather hard of hearing, he could hear better than his son, but he can, that is a speciality. The peasant's father, he can hear what the king said to him. No, he said, I never sowed nor reaped any grain like this in my field. And he answered that, no, I never sowed it, not reaped it. As for buying, I never bought any, for in my time money was not yet in use. Everyone grew his corn on, and when there was any need, we shared with one each other. So, what he said, yes, in my own time we cultivate all the products, not for selling or buying is not there. We just develop, we just cultivate our own products to food, for food to eat. So, if we want any grain, we just share it with other. I do not know where such kind of corn grew. Ours was larger and yielded more flour than the present day grain. But I never saw any like this. He said that ours was larger and yielded more flour than the present day grain. He said the speciality of grain. In his time, the grain, it contained more flour than today's. Come to next page. I have, however, heard my father say that in this time the grain grew larger and yielded more flour. You had better ask him. And he said that I am not aware, or I am unaware of this grain. So, you may better ask my father. So, the king sent for the old man's father. Now, the king just arranged all the servants and sent them to this old man's father. So, the first peasant is there, then his father came. Now, his own father. He ended the walking easily and without crutches. Now the peasant's father's father came to the king's side without any crutches. His eyes were clear. What is speciality? What is the speciality of his eyes? His eyes were very clear. His hearing good, and he keep a good hearing capacity, and he spoke distinctly, and he could speak. The king showed him the grain, and the old grandfather looked at it and turned it about in his hand. Now the king gave the seed to him, and he just looked at the grain. It is long since I saw such a fine grain, said he, and he bit a piece of and tasted it. It is the very same kind, he added. Now the man touched the grain, and he just bite some of the pieces of the grain, and he could understand that yes, it was the grain that we cultivate in my own age. So here also you have 3 questions. So come to the 4th question. For in my time money was not yet in use. How would the people have got the grain they wanted? So here the peasant's father said that in my time money is not in use. We just do something. If they want the grain, they do something. So what they do? That is the question, and write the answer. Now the 5th question, what difference do you see in the grandfather and the old peasant? So some difference is there in the grandfather and the old peasant. So write the difference. Now the next session of our story, that is the corn. The corn. The corn. Tell me, grandfather, began the king, when and where was such corn grown? So this peasant's father said that I know this grain. I can identify this grain. And the king said that, tell me, grandfather, began the king, when and where was such corn grew? Have you ever bought any like it or sown it in your fields? And the king repeated the same questions. And the old man replied. Now the old man replied, corn like this is used to grow everywhere in my time. In my time, this corn is very popular, very famous, because everywhere, every people in their field just cultivate this crop, this grain. I lived on corn like this in the days of my youth and fed others on it. It was such a grain that we used to sow, reap and thresh. So in my time, this is the only seed, that we sow, that we reap, that we cultivate or thresh, etc. So here you can see some words like sow, reap and thresh. It is related with agriculture, cultivation, farming. And the king asked, tell me, grandfather, did you buy it anywhere or did you grow it all yourself? Then the king asked another question, tell me, grandfather, did you buy it anywhere? Did you buy this seed from anywhere? Or did you grow it all yourself? Or did you cultivate all these yourself? The old man smiled. That time the old man gave a smile. In my time, he answered, no one ever thought of such a sin as buying or selling bread. And we knew nothing of money. Each man had enough corn of his own. That is the answer of the grandfather. What is the answer? In my time, he answered, no one ever thought of such as a sin as buying or selling bread. So grain is a part of food item. It is a food item. We just cook that flour. So he said that in my time we thought the buying or selling of bread, selling of this grain, the flour, is considered as a sin in their age. We knew something of money and we knew nothing of money. They don't know about money and the use of it. Each man had enough corn of his own. Each of the people, each man has their own corn in their own field. Then Then tell me, grandfather, asked the king, where was your field? Where did you grow corn like this? Then the king asked another question. Tell me, grandfather, where was your field? Where was your field? Where did you grow corn like this, and where you plant, where you grow this corn? And the grandfather answered, my field was God's earth. That is the point. He said that not my field, that is the God's earth. The earth is my field. Wherever I plow, it was my field. That is in the ancient time. That is in the ancient time. Wherever they plow, they just consider, they take the places to grow something, that is their field. Land was free. In that time, the land was free and wide. It was a thing no man called his own. So, in that time, no owner is there for the land. Land was free and they can do as their own. Labor was the only thing men called their own. That time, only thing, the man has the one thing, that is labor. Labor was the only thing men called as their own. Men considered as their property as land. Labor, not land, labor. Answer me two more questions, said the king. Now the king said to him that, answer my two questions. The first is, why did the earth bear such grain then and has ceased to do so now? And the second is, why does your grandson walk with two crutches, your son with one, and you yourself with none? That is two questions. So, the king asked two questions to him, the grandfather. The first question is, why did the earth bear such grain then and has ceased to do so now? So, one time this grain is very sufficient here, but not now. And the second is, why does your grandson, the second question is, your grandson come this palace with two crutches and your son in one and you without any one. So, what is the reason for that? Then your eyes are bright, your teeth sound, and your speech clear and pleasant to the ear. How have these things come about? So, what is the question? The first person cannot see and cannot hear. The second, his father can see, however, but hear something. But this grandfather can see everything very clearly, hear everything very neatly. So, what it happens? And the old man answered, these things are so because men have ceased to live by their own labor and have taken to depending on the labor of others. In olden times, men lived according to God's law. They had what was their own, they coveted not what others had produced. So, that is the answer of this grandfather, because in ancient times we do all the activities, we work hard, and that was the God's law. We do and we cultivate everything as our own, not to produce others and we just eat it. We just cultivate and we eat it. So, that is working is more important. That is the main point in this story. So, here we stop our class. The grain as big as hen's egg. So, let us discuss the textual questions. Side question, question number 6. What details of the grain did the great grandfather give? So, what details about? What are the details about the grain the grandfather give? Then the 7th question, what is the sin mentioned by the grandfather? Grandfathers considered or thinks that something is acted as a sin in their age. So, what is that? Now, the 8th question, what moral do you learn from the old man's word? So, here in the last part of the text story, the old man said that, what said a moral to us. It is a moral point. So, you have to identify it and write it. Now, come to page number 113. Let us revisit the story. How did the wise men try to find the details of the corn? How did the wise men, the king asked a question about the grain. That time the wise men do something, something. So, just write it in detail. How did the wise men try to find the details of the corn? That is the first question. You write the answer. Next, why was the great grandfather healthier than his son and grandson? So, look at that. We said that the grandfather and the great grandfather, not the grandfather, the great grandfather is very healthier than his son and the grandson. So, what is the reason for that? Then the third question, how did the king become aware of the merit of labor at the end of the story? How did the king become aware of the merit? At last, king also understood the dignity of labor, the merit of labor, the advantages of labor. So, how he understood that at the end of the story? Write the answer. Then the fourth question, how was the life of the people in olden days? So, how the old people live in a different style. So, how was the life of the people in olden days? So, that is the question. Now, come to next page, page number 114, activity 1. The journey of the big grain of corn started when the children playing found the corn in a ravine and ended when it reached the old peasant's grandfather, who unfolded the details about the grain. Let us complete the journey of a big grain of corn by filling the empty boxes. So, you can see some boxes there. So, you have to write, you have to fill the chart, the story of or the journey of the grain. The first, you remember the story? Yes, in first the children got the grain in a ravine, then after that who bought it? So, write it in the second column. Then the king, he sold it into the king. Next, what happened? Then all the peasant. So, complete this journey of the big grain. Very simple. Then activity 2. The king sent for the old man's grandfather and he was brought before the king. The king showed him the grain. The great grandfather looked at it and smiled. Imagine and write the possible conversation between the king and the great grandfather. So, here the king at last called the great grandfather and they are in a conversation. So, let us complete the conversation. King, dear grandfather, can you tell me where this corn was grown? That is the dialogue, the first dialogue that is given by the king. So, let us complete the following dialogues of great grandfather and the king. Now, come to next page, the activity 3. Look at the pictures carefully. You can see two pictures. Do you see flies hovering over the fruits in basket A? Can you see any picture? Yes, flies are there. Flies are there. Why do you think there are no flies around the fruits in basket B? Discuss and write. Very good question. What is the question? Two boxes of fruits are there. Two baskets of fruits are there. A and B. And in basket A, we can see what? Flies. Flies are just hovering over the baskets. And B, there is no flies. So, what is the difference in between them? Or how it is differentiated? We cannot see flies in the second. So, what is the reason for that? Just write the answer. And come to activity 4. In Kerala, we buy most of the vegetables and food items from the market, isn't it? We buy all the products from the market. But there are many people who grow vegetables and good food grains in their houses, farms, schools. But many people cultivate their own. It is their own. Name some vegetables and fruits that you can cultivate at home or in your school. So, very simple question. You just write what are the vegetables or what are the fruits you can cultivate in your own home or your own gardens. Let's list them out. Now, come to next question. Now, write down the advantages of growing vegetables and fruits at home. The following hints will help you. So, it is very important. We can cultivate all the necessary things, fruits or vegetables in our own garden. Why? Because it is pesticide free. So, here one activity is there. You just write the advantage, the merits of growing vegetables in our own area, our own home. You can select, you can write it about the advantages with the help of the hints given in brackets, that is fresh, pesticide free, healthy life, nutritious, stress reduction, satisfaction, additional income, natural manner. So, you have to write the advantages of growing vegetables in your home with the help of these points given in brackets. Now, activity 5. The king decided to honor the great grandfather. He organized a function to felicitate him. The great grandfather made a speech about the difference between the lifestyle and the methods of farming during his own time and that of the present generation. What would be the likely speech made by the great grandfather? Write the speech using the hints given in the box below. So, what you have to do now? Prepare a speech of what? About the difference between the lifestyle and the methods of farming during his own time and that of the present generation. So, what is the topic of speech? The difference between agriculture or cultivating something products in the olden era and the modern, that is the topic of the speech. You can see some points in the boxes, past and present. Lived by one's own labor. In past, in olden era, they just lived in their own labor, and now today depend on others. All the people depend on others to live. And the second point, in the past had no desire for what others had produced. Now jealous and greedy. In olden era they are not considered, they are not depend on others, but today they are jealous and greedy. Used natural methods of farming. In olden period, all the people, all the farmers just use what? Natural methods of farming, but now artificial methods. We use the pesticides, all those things. Not selfish and were generous, but now selfish and self-centered. So, with the help of these points, you just prepare a speech. Now, activity 6. Look at the words given below. Compare the features of the old peasant and the great grandfather. One is done for you. So, what is the activity? Just to compare the features of the peasant and the great grandfather. So, some points are there in the yellow box. You have to select the points and write it there. Old peasant and great grandfather. Bright eyes, that is given there in great grandfather's column. Then deaf, greedy, generous, healthy, lazy, clear speech, sharp ears, unhealthy, irrational, unselfish, rational, selfish, toothless, indistinct speech, hardworking, poor eyesight, strong teeth. So, you have to differentiate, you have to select the correct points from the yellow box and just write it here, old peasant's column and great grandfather. Using the words you have listed, write a description each about the old peasant and the great grandfather. So, with the help of these words that you classified in different columns, you have to create what? You have to make a description of the old peasant and the great grandfather. So, for today we stop our class. Hope you all understood the story, The Grain as Big as Hen's Egg.